The morning alarm at Thunderbolt Air Force Base cut through the Nevada desert silence at 0500 hours, just like it had every day for the past 15 years of 68-year-old Victoria Viper Kane's carefully hidden military career. Her silver hair was pulled back in the same regulation bun she'd worn since she was 25 and desperate to prove she belonged in a cockpit that the military said was no place for a woman. What the young hotshots at Thunderbolt didn't know was that the woman they whispered about in the mess hall, calling her Granny Maintenance, when they thought she couldn't hear, had more classified flight hours than their entire squadron combined. They saw gray hair and weathered hands and assumed she was just another old mechanic riding out her time until retirement. They had no idea that Victoria Kane was one of only 8 pilots in the world certified to fly aircraft that didn't officially exist. Commander Jake "Razor" Morrison was everything Victoria had learned to despise in her 4 decades of service. At 35 years old, perfectly pressed uniform, teeth whitened to commercial brightness, and a last name that opened doors his skills never could. His grandfather, Admiral Marcus Morrison, had paved every step of his meteoric rise through the ranks. Where Victoria had clawed her way up through grit and excellence, Jake had glided on connections and charm. Morning fossil. Jake called out as Victoria performed her daily maintenance inspection on the F-35 Lightning, his voice carrying just loud enough for the gathering maintenance crew to hear. Hope you remembered your magnifying glass. These new instruments have such tiny numbers. Victoria's hands never paused in their methodical check of the aircraft's control surfaces, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 months ago, when Jake had taken command of the 447th Test Squadron, his first unofficial order had been to clean house of what he called legacy personnel. The message was clear. Older technicians, especially women, weren't welcome in his vision of a modernized Air Force. Captain Tyler "Ace" Brooks, Jake's eager second-in-command, snickered from his position near the hangar. At 29, Tyler embodied everything wrong with the new generation of officers, technically proficient but lacking the wisdom that came from years of making life-or-death decisions. His phone was already out, recording what he clearly hoped would be another viral moment for his social media followers. "Maybe we should get you one of those step ladders, ma'am," Tyler added, his Texas drawl dripping with false concern. "You know, for the height? I hear they make excellent ones for seniors." The maintenance crew shifted uncomfortably. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a 18-year veteran who'd worked with Victoria on dozens of classified projects, opened her mouth to say something, then caught Jake's warning glare and fell silent. Everyone knew challenging the new commander was career suicide. Victoria finished her inspection and signed off on the maintenance log, her signature as steady as it had been decades ago. "Commander Morrison," she said quietly, "I've been working on military aircraft since before you could spell airplane. Perhaps you'd like to compare technical certifications sometime?" Jake's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with increased wattage. "Technical certifications, Granny? With all due respect, half your experience was probably gained on aircraft that belong in a museum. This isn't the Korean War anymore. We need people who can handle modern technology, not relics who learned mechanics when computers filled entire rooms." The words hit their mark as Jake intended. But what he didn't see was the way Sergeant Santos's eyes widened slightly, or how Colonel Patricia Hayes, watching from the tower, suddenly straightened in recognition of something she'd hoped never to witness. They knew fragments of Victoria's real history, classified details that Jake's security clearance wasn't high enough to access. Victoria climbed down from the aircraft with the fluid grace of someone who'd done it thousands of times. As she gathered her tools, she thought about her daughter Sarah, who'd begged her to retire rather than endure this kind of treatment. She thought about her late husband Marcus, also a test pilot, who died in a training accident 12 years ago. Most of all, she thought about all the young technicians, especially women and minorities, who Jake had already driven away with his toxic leadership. "You know what, Morrison?" Victoria said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Colonel Hayes lean forward in the tower. "You keep talking about modern technology and advanced systems. How about we settle this debate properly?" Jake's eyebrows rose, intrigued by what he assumed was desperation. "What do you have in mind, Fossil?" "A demonstration," Victoria replied calmly. "You pick any aircraft on this base, any aircraft at all, and if I can't outperform your best pilot in technical knowledge and practical application, I'll submit my resignation immediately." The hangar fell silent except for the distant sound of jet engines on patrol. Tyler's phone captured every word as Jake's grin widened to predatory proportions. "Any aircraft?" Jake repeated, already savoring his victory. "Even the new classified systems?" "Especially the classified systems," Victoria confirmed, and something in her tone made Colonel Hayes reach for her secure phone. Jake rubbed his hands together like a man about to collect a debt. In that case, I choose the X-47C Phantom. It's our most advanced experimental aircraft, classified at the highest levels. Hell, I doubt you even know what it looks like. Victoria's smile was sharp as winter wind. The X-47C. Interesting choice, Commander. When would you like to schedule this demonstration? How about right now? Jake announced to the crowd. I think it's time everyone here learned the difference between outdated experience and cutting-edge expertise. What Jake didn't know was that Victoria Viper Kane hadn't just worked on the X-47C Phantom. She had been the primary test pilot during its development phase, logging over 300 classified flight hours in an aircraft that officially didn't exist. Her call sign Viper had been earned during a classified mission over hostile territory, where she'd eliminated 3 enemy aircraft in an engagement that would never appear in any public record. As the crowd gathered around Hangar 12, where the X-47C was stored under maximum security, Victoria felt a familiar calm settling over her. For 15 years she had maintained her cover identity, enduring condescension and disrespect to protect operational security. But Jake Morrison had just crossed a line that made continued secrecy impossible. Colonel Hayes arrived at the hangar flanked by military police and security personnel, her expression grim. "Commander Morrison," she said, her voice cutting through the excited chatter, "are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this demonstration?" "Absolutely, ma'am," Jake replied confidently. "It's time to separate the wheat from the chaff around here." Hayes nodded slowly, then spoke into her secure radio. "Control, this is Hawk 6. Initiate Protocol 7. Authorization Bravo Alpha 99. The hangar doors opened with a mechanical rumble that seemed to shake the desert floor. What emerged from the shadows made even the most experienced pilots gasp in amazement. The X-47C Phantom was a work of art disguised as a weapon, sleek, angular, and radiating an aura of barely contained power that made the F-35s look like training aircraft. "Holy shit," Tyler whispered, his phone shaking as he tried to record the reveal. "I've never seen anything like that." Jake felt his confidence waver as he looked at the alien curves of the aircraft. The X-47C looked like it had been designed by engineers from the future, with systems and interfaces that seemed to operate on principles he couldn't immediately understand. "Still feeling confident, Commander?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying an authority that made several mechanics straighten instinctively. "Of course," Jake replied, though sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. "It's just a machine. Buttons and switches, right?" Victoria approached the aircraft with the reverence of someone greeting an old friend. Her weathered hands traced the sleek fuselage with unmistakable familiarity, and she began pointing out systems and capabilities with the fluid expertise of someone who knew every rivet and wire. "The X-47C operates on a hybrid propulsion system," she began, her voice taking on the cadence of a professor addressing students. "Conventional jet engines for standard flight operations, supplemented by a classified electromagnetic drive for stealth and high-altitude operations. The control systems utilize quantum computing processors that can calculate flight parameters faster than human reflexes can respond." Jake stared at the aircraft, his confidence evaporating like desert morning dew. "How do you know all that?" "That information is classified above your clearance level." Victoria smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the predatory grin of someone who was done hiding. "Commander, you assumed I was just another old mechanic because that's what you were meant to assume. What you didn't bother to investigate was why someone with my supposed qualifications had unrestricted access to the most classified sections of this base." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her expression mixing admiration with resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Colonel Victoria Viper Kane, primary test pilot for the Phantom program and holder of the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor device. Her cover identity as a maintenance technician has been maintained for operational security, but Commander Morrison's challenge has made continued secrecy impossible." The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Tyler's phone captured every shocked face as the implications sank in. Jake Morrison hadn't just challenged a mechanic to prove her competence, he challenged one of the most elite pilots in the United States military. "That's impossible," Jake stammered, his world tilting off its axis. "I saw her file. She's a maintenance tech, level 4 clearance." "You saw the file you were meant to see," Victoria replied calmly. "A carefully crafted identity designed to let me observe how the Air Force treats its senior personnel, particularly women. What you didn't see were the classified portions of my record." She gestured to the X-47C behind her. 15 years in the Phantom program. Test pilot for aircraft that won't be public knowledge for another decade. 89 combat missions that officially never happened, including the mission where I earned this. She pulled a medal from her pocket, a silver star that made several officers step back in recognition. While you were learning to tie your shoes, I was flying missions over territories we're not supposed to admit we've entered. While you were playing video games, I was testing aircraft that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. And while you were using your family name to fast-track through the academy, I was earning decorations that can't be mentioned in public because the missions they commemorate don't exist in any official record. Jake's face had gone from red to white to a sickly green that several people would later describe as the color of someone realizing they just stepped in something they couldn't clean off their shoes. But you're just an old woman, he whispered, the words sounding pathetic even to his own ears. I'm a 68-year-old woman who can fly aircraft you've never dreamed of, Victoria corrected. Age doesn't diminish skill, Commander. Experience enhances it. And you're about to learn exactly what 40 years of experience looks like when it stops pretending to be less than it is. Colonel Hayes checked her watch. Colonel Kane, your demonstration flight has been cleared by the Pentagon. All airspace above 30,000 feet has been restricted, and you have unlimited authorization for advanced maneuvers. Victoria nodded, then turned to address the crowd that had gathered. For 15 years I've listened to jokes about my age, my gender, and my supposed limitations. I've been called granny, fossil, and every other dismissive term that small minds use when they can't recognize excellence. Today that ends. She began her pre-flight inspection with movements that revealed decades of muscle memory. Every check was performed with surgical precision, every system verified with the confidence of someone who knew the aircraft better than its designers. Commander Morrison, she called out as she prepared to climb into the cockpit, you wanted to see the difference between outdated experience and cutting-edge expertise. Pay attention because this is going to be your only lesson. Jake could only watch in stunned silence as Victoria settled into the pilot's seat with the familiarity of someone coming home. The X-47C systems responded to her touch like a musical instrument being played by its composer. The engine spun up with a sound unlike any conventional aircraft, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the hangar floor and into the bones of everyone present. Through the cockpit glass, Victoria ran through her final checks with fluid grace, her hands dancing across controls that Jake was only just beginning to understand existed. Tower, this is Viper 1 requesting clearance for unrestricted demonstration flight. Victoria's voice came through the radio with professional crispness that had been honed over decades of high-stakes missions. Viper 1, you are cleared for full demonstration. Show them what the Phantom can do. What happened next redefined everyone's understanding of what was possible in the realm of aviation. The X-47C didn't just take off. It seemed to defy gravity itself. Victoria pulled the aircraft into a vertical climb so steep that it appeared to be falling upward, then executed a series of maneuvers that made the laws of physics seem like gentle suggestions rather than absolute rules. At 15,000 feet, she performed a maneuver that had no name in any flight manual. The aircraft seemed to stop completely in midair, rotate 360 degrees on its vertical axis, then accelerate to supersonic speed in a direction that should have been impossible given its previous momentum. Jesus Christ, Tyler whispered, his phone capturing every impossible second. How is she doing that? Colonel Hayes, watching through high-powered binoculars, found herself smiling for the first time in months. She's not just flying that aircraft, Captain. She's having a conversation with it. The demonstration continued for 20 minutes that redefined everyone's understanding of aerial combat. Victoria performed maneuvers that combined the X-47C's advanced technology with piloting skills that transcended training and entered the realm of artistry. She concluded with a landing that was so gentle, so perfectly controlled, that the aircraft seemed to simply decide to stop flying and settle onto the runway like a leaf finding its place on still water. As the engines wound down and Victoria climbed out of the cockpit, the hangar was so quiet you could hear the desert wind whistling through the open doors. 300 people stood in absolute silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Victoria removed her helmet, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight, and walked toward Jake with the measured pace of someone who had just reminded the world what mastery looked like. Commander Morrison, she said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hangar, you asked about the difference between outdated experience and cutting-edge expertise. Did that demonstration answer your question? Jake tried to speak, but no words came. His entire worldview had just been demolished by a 68-year-old woman he dismissed as a relic. Colonel Hayes stepped forward with a folder marked with security classifications that made several officers look away. Commander Morrison, effective immediately, you are relieved of command pending a full investigation into your leadership practices. Your systematic harassment of senior personnel, particularly Colonel Kane, has been documented and forwarded to the Inspector General's office. The words "relieved of command" echoed through the hangar like a death knell. Jake's face went through every shade of shock and disbelief as military police stepped forward. But my grandfather, my family connections. Jake stammered. Your grandfather called personally to express his shame at your conduct, Hayes replied coldly. Admiral Morrison specifically requested that you face the full consequences of your actions without family interference. Apparently, the Navy doesn't appreciate having its reputation tarnished by prejudiced incompetence. Tyler Brooks found himself facing his own reckoning as cybercrime investigators confiscated his phone. Every video he'd made mocking senior personnel, every post celebrating toxic leadership, had been documented and would be used as evidence in multiple disciplinary proceedings. Captain Brooks, one of the investigators announced, you're under arrest for conduct unbecoming an officer and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Your social media campaigns targeting service members based on age and gender constitute harassment under military law. As Tyler was led away in handcuffs, his viral aspirations transforming into a very different kind of internet fame, Victoria found herself surrounded by young airmen and women who looked at her with expressions of awe and gratitude. Colonel Kane, asked Lieutenant Jennifer Cruz, a 26-year-old Latina pilot who'd been considering leaving the service due to Morrison's toxic leadership, how did you endure 15 years of hiding who you really were? Victoria smiled, remembering her own younger self asking similar questions. Lieutenant, I endured it because I knew that someday someone like Morrison would push too far, and when they did, the truth would be more powerful than any lie they could tell about me. Excellence doesn't age, it doesn't diminish, and it certainly doesn't apologize for existing. The next several hours passed in a blur of debriefings, security protocols and damage control as the Pentagon worked to manage the exposure of one of its most classified programs. But the real change was in the atmosphere of Thunderbolt Air Force Base itself. Within 24 hours, Morrison's policies targeting senior personnel had been rescinded. Within a week, the 3 junior officers who'd transferred rather than work under his leadership had requested to return. Within a month, Thunderbolt had become known throughout the Air Force as a model for inclusive leadership and respect for experience. Victoria was offered a promotion to Brigadier General and command of the entire experimental aircraft program, but she declined with characteristic grace. Colonel Hayes, she said during their final meeting, I've spent 40 years proving myself to people who should have recognized my value from the beginning. I don't need another star on my collar to validate who I am. Instead, she accepted a new position, Director of Advanced Pilot Training, where she would be responsible for identifying and developing the next generation of elite aviators. Her first class included pilots from every demographic the military served, united not by their backgrounds but by their extraordinary potential. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the same hangar where her humiliation had been transformed into vindication, now serving as the headquarters for the Advanced Aviation Excellence Center. The walls displayed photos of her students, young pilots whose careers would be defined by merit rather than prejudice, skill rather than connections. Any regrets? Asked Colonel Hayes, who had been promoted to general after the leadership reforms she'd implemented at Thunderbolt were adopted Air Force-wide. Victoria considered the question while watching her newest class of students prepare for their first advanced training flight. About exposing Morrison? None at all. About the 15 years I spent hiding my capabilities? That's more complicated. The mission required secrecy, but the cost was watching too many good people suffer under leaders who didn't deserve their authority. And now I wake up every morning knowing that somewhere, a young pilot is being judged on their merit rather than their demographics. Somewhere, an experienced aviator is being valued for their wisdom rather than discarded for their age. Somewhere, a leader is being chosen for their character rather than their connections. The morning briefing was unlike anything the old Thunderbolt would have recognized. The pilots gathered around the planning table represented every demographic the military served, united by shared excellence rather than divided by artificial barriers. Lieutenant Maria Santos, now Captain Santos and Victoria's hand-picked successor as lead instructor, was briefing a training mission that would test the limits of both human skill and aircraft capability. The easy professionalism in the room would have been impossible under Morrison's leadership, where every difference was treated as a potential weakness. Colonel Kane, Captain Santos said as Victoria joined the group, We wanted to thank you for what you did, not just exposing Morrison but creating this program. It's given us hope that the Air Force can actually live up to its ideals." Victoria smiled, remembering her own early days when such hope had seemed naive. "Captain, the Air Force has always had these ideals. We just sometimes forget to live by them." The transformation wasn't limited to Thunderbolt. News of the Phantom Revelation, as military blogs had dubbed it, had spread throughout the armed forces, triggering conversations about leadership, respect, and the true meaning of strength. Jake Morrison, now former Commander Morrison, was serving his sentence at the Military Correctional Facility at Fort Leavenworth. Reports from his counselors indicated he spent most of his time in the library, finally reading the leadership books his privilege had never required him to understand. His family name, once synonymous with naval excellence, was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of nepotism and unchecked privilege. Tyler Brooks had been discharged dishonorably, his social media presence transforming from influencer platform to permanent evidence of character flaws that would follow him for the rest of his life. The most significant change was in military leadership training itself. Victoria's experience had prompted a complete overhaul of how the services identified and developed leaders. New emphasis was placed on emotional intelligence, cultural competency, and the ability to recognize and develop talent regardless of its packaging. 1 year after the incident, Victoria received a letter that made her both laugh and tear up. It was from Jake, written in the careful handwriting of someone with nothing but time to think about their mistakes. "Colonel Kane, I know I have no right to contact you and I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I was too blind to see before. You weren't the problem with the Air Force, I was. I spent so much time trying to look like what I thought a leader should be that I never learned what leadership actually meant. I hope the pilots under your command know how lucky they are." Victoria folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. She didn't forgive Jake. Forgiveness was something he'd have to earn over years of better choices. But she recognized in his words the first sign that he might finally be learning the lessons his privilege had prevented him from understanding. On the first anniversary of the Phantom Revelation, Thunderbolt Air Force Base hosted its annual air show, the first time in decades that the event was more than just a display of machinery. This year, it was a celebration of the human spirit that powered the world's greatest air force. Victoria stood on the reviewing platform next to General Hayes, watching as the newest class of pilots performed their graduation demonstration above. In the crowd below, she could see hundreds of faces that represented the future of military aviation, diverse, talented, and united by shared purpose rather than divided by artificial barriers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice echoed across the flight line, "we're honored to present a special demonstration by Colonel Victoria Viper Kane, flying the X-47C Phantom." The crowd erupted in applause as Victoria's aircraft appeared on the horizon. This time there was no secrecy, no hidden agenda, just a master pilot sharing her art with people who could appreciate the decades of skill and dedication it represented. Her demonstration was different from the one that had exposed Morrison's ignorance. This was joyful, celebratory, showing not just what was possible with advanced technology, but what human excellence could achieve when given the chance to flourish. As she executed a perfect knife-edge pass at near supersonic speed, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 40 years of proving herself, 15 years of hiding her true capabilities, and one perfect day when the truth had finally been revealed. After the demonstration, Victoria found herself surrounded by young pilots asking questions about flying, about leadership, about how to navigate a career in a profession that didn't always welcome diversity. She answered each question with the patience of someone who remembered asking similar questions decades ago. "Colonel Kane," asked Lieutenant Jennifer Park, a 24-year-old Korean-American pilot who'd applied to Thunderbolt specifically because of Victoria's program, "what advice would you give to someone who feels like they don't fit the traditional image of a military pilot?" Victoria smiled, remembering her own younger self asking the same question. "Never let anyone else define what a warrior looks like. Excellence speaks every language, transcends every boundary, and recognizes no artificial limits. If you can do the job better than the next person, that's all that matters." As the air show wound down, Victoria walked through the hangar where her humiliation had been transformed into vindication. The space was now home to the Leadership Excellence Center, where officers from around the world came to learn about building inclusive, effective teams. On the wall was a simple plaque that read, "Strength through diversity. Excellence through character. Victory through unity." Below it was a photo from that day 1 year ago, not of Morrison's moment of supposed triumph, but of Victoria standing beside her X-47C, surrounded by the diverse group of pilots who represented the Air Force's true future. As the sun set over Thunderbolt Air Force Base, Victoria received one final message on her secure phone. It was from the current President of the United States, a brief note that made her both laugh and tear up simultaneously. "Colonel Kane, history will remember your courage in the cockpit, but I'll remember your courage in standing up for what's right. The nation is stronger because of people like you. Thank you for reminding us that our greatest weapons are our values." Victoria looked up at the darkening sky where she'd spent most of her adult life, where she'd tested the boundaries of what was possible and redefined what it meant to be a warrior. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to mentor the next generation, new chances to prove that excellence knew no artificial boundaries. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Jake Morrison had tried to destroy her based on his narrow prejudices and failed spectacularly. More importantly, his failure had exposed a cancer in military culture that could now be treated and cured. The ghost had finally stopped hiding, and in her wake she'd cleared the skies for countless others to follow. Commander Morrison had wanted to know what cutting-edge expertise looked like. He'd gotten his answer, just not in the way he'd expected. Real expertise didn't come from youth or connections or the latest technology. It came from decades of dedication, the wisdom of experience, and the unshakable belief that excellence would always triumph over prejudice. Victoria Kane's war wasn't fought with weapons or tactics. It was fought with truth, dignity, and the unstoppable force of competence finally unleashed. And she had won. If this story of courage and hidden strength inspired you, remember that excellence has no expiration date, wisdom increases with age, and the most dangerous opponent is often the one everyone underestimates. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving others wrong, it's in proving yourself right.